Well, it's great to have you guys this morning. I'm excited about a couple things here. First of all, I want to point out some excellence going on. Wasn't this worship led with excellence this morning? Wasn't that something? We got to give these guys a round of applause. Because I love to recognize, a core value of ours is excellence. And this morning I've just been seeing excellence. These guys have poured into this worship set, including our tech people in the back behind in the booth over there. I mean, they really take this seriously and give it all they've got. And I think when we give it all we've got, God is honored by that. And people are inspired, and I was inspired this morning. Man, that last hymn, that got me going. I got to pull myself together before I even get up here. And then seeing the kids this morning, all their new signage and them worshiping together, you guys. One of my highlights every week is getting to see kids worship. On Wednesday night, we had 40 kids in here. We have our full youth and kids program back up and going. We have our adult Bible study, and I get to see these kids worship every Wednesday. And seeing 40 kids worship is a lot of fun. And then at chapels here, every Friday at chapel here at the school, they come in here and they worship. And it's a little bit of a loss that the kids are worshiping over there and not worshiping in here. But when the kids worship, you guys, there's dance moves. All right? So we thought either we can teach the congregation all the dance moves, or the kids will have a lot more fun doing their own dance moves in there. And for a second I thought, maybe we should just keep them in here and teach everybody the dance moves to go with all those songs, but you would not want to see me dance. That'd be a tragedy. All right? So those kids are having a full worship session in there, and we celebrate that. We are, sometimes we will have our 5 minutes of fellowship. Sometimes we won't. Sometimes we'll just roll into the sermon like today. But I encourage you guys, come early and stay late. That is a good sign of a healthy church when people are coming early and staying late. And we see that often, when we have to kick people out of the social hall at the end of the day, that is a good sign. So we may or may not have this coming up here today. If we don't, we'll move it off the stage. And if we do, at least you can. If it doesn't work, then we'll move it off the stage. That's fine, because we do have our Bibles today, and we have them in the pews as well. So this morning we're getting into the book of Daniel. We're going to start with Daniel chapter 1. And when you guys think of Daniel, what do you think of? The lion's den, right? Okay, that's number one. What else do you think of when you think of the book of Daniel? What's that? Vegetable, okay, we'll talk about that today. Yeah, we'll talk about that today. We often think about two big stories. We think about Daniel in the lion's den, and we think about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. So those are the two things we think about, and I'll pull this off to the side, unless you guys want to watch, like, Hulu. Okay, it sounds good. So those are the two things we think about, but today we're going to talk about what happened before those two big stories. And if you look at the book of Daniel, most of the book of Daniel is leading up to these stories. These two big stories, there's a lot of backstory to them. And a lot of small things and small decisions had to happen in order for these big stories of faith to come into being. So before the Daniel in the lion's den, before the fiery furnace, there were many small decisions in the right direction to get Daniel to that huge moment, that huge big faith moment. And today, you guys, what we want to focus in on is small steps can lead to big accomplishments. So think about the big accomplishments that you guys have had in life. For some of you, it's a fitness goal. Now, we got all the tech people coming up here. This is great. For some, okay, that's fine. That's no problem. For some of you guys, it's a fitness goal. So think about the big things you've accomplished in fitness. Maybe it's you want to lose some weight, or you want to win a race, or you want to join the team or get invited to be a part of a team. So we've all maybe had some big fitness goals that we've tried to achieve. Some of us, we have big financial goals that we're trying to achieve. Hopefully, we're all trying to achieve some big financial goals. We're trying to make some money. We're trying to get out of debt. We're trying to buy that car. That's my daughter here, trying to buy that car. We're trying to buy a house maybe. We're trying to pay off our house. We're trying to get to retirement. Big goals, right? Those are huge goals. Think about relationship goals. You know, you might have had it in your mind to get married, to start a family, to get a boyfriend, a girlfriend, whatever. There's relationship goals. You might want to build into your family, build into your kids, and be a good mom and dad. You've got big goals when it comes to that. All these things, education goals. If you're in high school, your goal is to get out of high school, get that degree. Maybe you head off to college, you want to get that degree. Some of you guys, you went all through. Some of you guys have doctorates, big goals to accomplish. What is a common thread that runs through all these things? Man, that's hard work. All those big goals take so much work. They're so hard. They don't happen overnight. They take a lot of time and effort. And here's something that's true about all those big goals. It takes small decisions in the right direction to get to those big goals. It's the small things that lead to the big things. Sometimes we're always focused on the big thing. In the book of Daniel, we're focusing on Daniel in the lion's den and that fiery furnace that the three friends got thrown into. Those are the big things. But sometimes we look past all the little things that made them successful and made them have an unshakable faith when it came to the big things. So let me give you an example of that. I'll just give you a personal example. I had 2 fitness goals when I turned 40. I wanted to run a marathon, and I've talked about that before. But another one I haven't talked about, I had a goal to join the 1,000-pound club. Now, you might not know does anybody know what the 1,000-pound club is? Probably no one maybe knows that. If you're a weightlifter, Alex knows. If you're a weightlifter, it's to have 3 different maxes in your weightlifting to equal out to 1,000 pounds. So it's your deadlift, your squat, and your bench press. So the maximum amount you do on those 3 different lifts should equal 1,000 pounds. So that's the 1,000-pound club. And when I was 40, I hit the 400 club when it comes to a deadlift. All right? And so that never happened before. A deadlift and a squat, you can keep doing it even though you get older. Bench press, not so much. A lot of other things you can't. You lose a lot of momentum. But you can still do a bench press and a squat even though you get into those 40s, 50s, and 60s. And I've seen 70-year-olds who are doing incredible things with those lifts. So I wanted to join the 1,000-pound club. So I got to it at 40th birthday, and I had a coach in North Carolina. In North Carolina, I could afford a coach at the gym. In California, I can't. All right? In North Carolina, I had a coach. All right? So we had a whole bunch of us. We were in this every morning at like 5 o'clock. We'd be there at the gym. We had a coach, and he wanted us to join the 1,000-pound club, so I'm all in it. And at first, it goes pretty quick. Man, I put 20 pounds onto my max deadlift. I put like 30 pounds onto my max squat. But then the closer you get, the harder it gets. So at the end, if you can go up by 1 pound, that's amazing. Have you guys ever seen what half-pound weights look like at the gym? Like they're like that thin and they're like that big, and you put them on, and I just went up by 1 pound. And it was so hard. It took so long to get closer to my goal. And you guys, at the end, we were determined. And our coach was behind us. So he said, you guys, I want you to increase your squat. So you're going to do squats 5 days a week for a month. And we did it in October. So what did we call it? Squattober. It was Squattober, you guys. So the coach is ready, Squattober. Squat every day for an entire month. And you guys, we would do that, and sometimes it went up, and some years, now I'm giving you guys a bit of a clue of how long this took. Some years, we would do Squattober, and I'd work at squats every day for a month, and it didn't go up by a single pound. My max stayed the same, and I just broke even. Then we do deadlifts, and the coach is like, you're going to do deadlifts every day for an entire month. And we did it in December, so what did we call it? Dead-cember. It was Dead-cember, deadlifts every day for a month, you guys. And eventually, you guys, it took 9 years. By the time I turned 49, I joined the 1,000-pound club, and I kept it for 2 years. And don't ask me to do that ever again, because I'll never accomplish that ever again. My age has caught up with me. I'm 52 now, and I'm not going to get there again. And I can't afford a coach in California either. So that's a little bit about life, right? It's kind of like that in life. If you have some big goals in life, you just have to do the small things consistently over time to achieve those big goals. And we know that's like that in every area of life. There's a great book I read a couple of years ago called Atomic Habits by James Clear. Has anybody ever read Atomic Habits by James Clear? It's a great book. He's got a bunch of quotes. He's a great follow on Instagram. One of these quotes he kind of takes a bit of an old quote we all know. He says, Rome wasn't built in a day, but they were laying bricks every hour. Right? Rome wasn't built in a day. They were laying bricks every hour. You don't have to do it all today. Just lay a brick, and that's how you build something great. That's how you build something great. Well, Daniel was faithful with the small things, and that led him to being unshakable with the big things. Now, I could do a message on how to accomplish great goals in your finances and in your health and in your education and in your relationships, and that would be good, and it would be all true, and it would be all from the Bible. But first and foremost, I'm not going to talk about those things today, even though we can have some examples. What I want today, you guys, I want us to be unshakable with our faith. Because our faith is the foundation that we stand on to build all those other important things on. But if we have a shaky faith, I don't think we're going to be able to reach our God-given potential in any of those things. But if we have a solid faith in Jesus, if we work at our unshakable faith consistently with the small things over time, we're going to be able to stand on that solid foundation and build a life that we're proud of, and that God said you can do those things because you're standing on that solid foundation. So as we go through the book of Daniel, it's not going to be how to be a better businessman or how to be better at fitness or how to join the 1,000-pound club. Those are great examples. Those are maybe benefits of, first and foremost, standing on a solid faith. You guys, we live in some shaky times, don't we? We live in some pretty shaky times right now. I'll talk about that a little bit more. But when we live in shaky times, it's okay if we have an unshakable faith in God, because we can stand solid during unshaky times. But to have an unshakable faith, we got to do some small things. So let's see what Daniel did. Let's turn in our Bibles to Daniel chapter 1. Daniel had an unshakable faith because he had unshakable convictions. And today we'll talk about some convictions that he stood strong in order to build his faith stronger, so that when the lions came and when the fiery furnace came, he already had built himself up into a strong, unshakable faith by doing these smaller things. He had an unshakable faith. A little bit of context behind Daniel first. Before we get into that, Daniel was written by himself. He wrote that own book. He wrote it in 530 BC. All right, so that's a long time ago. 530 BC, 2,630 years ago. That's when the book of Daniel was written. So it's ancient knowledge. And the book of Daniel was actually prophesied by Isaiah. So Isaiah, 100 years before Babylon, Isaiah wrote down, and he said, "The time will surely come when everything in your palace and all that your predecessors have stored up to this day will be carried off to Babylon, and nothing will be left, says the Lord. And some of your descendants, your own flesh and blood, who will be born to you, will be taken away, and they will become eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." That was predicted by Isaiah 100 years before Daniel happened. And then Daniel is a book that's made up of historical narrative, and it's made up of prophecy. So there's a bunch of prophecy that we're going to get into in the book of Daniel. So Daniel was prophesied about by Isaiah, and Daniel prophesied about the Messiah who was to come, and all those prophecies have now come true. So it's a book about prophecy and faith and small things leading up to big things. It's an amazing book. Daniel was one. He's one of the top 10 in the Old Testament, right? You hear about the top 10 famous people in the Old Testament. You got Moses, you got Noah, you got Abraham, you got Solomon, you got David, you got all these famous people. Daniel is in the top 10, but Daniel is among the few people who never had a major moral failure. There's a couple, and just a couple, of people in the Old Testament who were the famous people God used who actually never had a big moral failure. Daniel was one of them. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the three friends. Moral failures never mentioned with them. Joseph is another one. Joseph and Daniel are kind of like parallel stories. There's a lot similar between those stories, including they never had a big moral failure. So there's a lot we can learn from Daniel. Daniel chapter 4, verse 17 is the theme of the whole book. And it says, so that the living may know that the Most High is sovereign over all the kingdoms of the earth. That's the theme that runs through the whole book. Even though Daniel and his friends are captive in Babylon, the theme is that our God is greater than all the kingdoms. There's 6 stories in the book of Daniel and 4 visions in the book of Daniel. And that gives you a little bit of background into the book of Daniel. So, Daniel chapter 1. We're going to read through that. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. And these he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylon, God small g, the false god of Babylonia. And he put those treasures of the treasures of God's temple into the house of his God. So this is Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar became the great super king of the world. Babylon was the superpower of that time. They had conquered Assyria. They went and conquered Egypt, right? The great nation of Egypt was conquered by Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar. Then they came to Jerusalem, and you guys, after Egypt and Assyria, it didn't take long. Jerusalem was gone. And he didn't destroy it right at first. He came back 2 more times, but by the time Nebuchadnezzar was done, Jerusalem was destroyed. And that was the prophecy that Isaiah had prophesied about 100 years before that Babylon would come and destroy Jerusalem. So that had happened, but then the king, verse 3, ordered Aspenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. So Nebuchadnezzar had a different strategy than most. Most kings would come and they would be intimidated by the best of the best. So what would they do to the best of the best? Kill them, right? They just kill everybody, right? And that's what most kings did. But Nebuchadnezzar was different. He was smarter than most kings, which is why he was ruling the superpower of the world during those days. He would destroy most of it, but he would take the best of the best. He would take the best of every nation he conquered, and he'd take their smartest people, their wisest people, even their best looking people. And he would take them and he would bring them into his kingdom. And so what we know about Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were young. They were probably between 14 and 18 years old, right? They were young and they got taken, and they were smart. They had been trained in the temple. They knew about all the Old Testament. They knew about the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. They knew about these things. They were smart people. They were the best of the best. And King Nebuchadnezzar said, I want these guys. I want these guys, and I want to integrate them so that they would make my kingdom greater. So it goes on, continuing in verse 4. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table, and they were to be trained for 3 years. And after that, they were to enter the king's service. This Nebuchadnezzar guy, he was brilliant. And he would just take the best of the best. And think about this for Daniel and his friends. There was only a small amount of people who were the best of the best. And there were at least 4 of them. There were probably more, but at least these 4 guys, Daniel and his 3 friends, they were taken up. They were brought 1,000 miles away to Babylon. Jerusalem to Babylon is about a 4-month journey. It's 1,000 miles away. And they'd be integrated into the language, the culture, the religion. All this stuff changed. Everything changed for these guys. I mean, they were shaken up. You couldn't get much more shaken up than that. They had seen their temple in Jerusalem and their people killed, probably their parents massacred. They had seen all this, and they were transported 1,000 miles away. A lot going on. It couldn't get much more shaky for these 4 young men. Verse 6, among those who were chosen were some from Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel he gave Belshazzar, and to Hananiah Shadrach, and to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. Their names originally pointed to the God of Israel. Now their names were changed to point to the false god of Babylon. So even their names were changed. And it's interesting how we never mention Daniel by Belshazzar, but we mention Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego by their new names. But Daniel never has his name changed in the book of Daniel. It just mentions it sometimes. Honestly, maybe that's because we can't say Belshazzar very well, and we just stick to Daniel, which is easier. I don't know. It's some tough names to say. Verse 8. But here's where the little things happen. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked that the chief official, he asked for permission not to defile himself with this way. So Daniel, he kind of was respectful most of the time, but he had his boundaries. And some things just crossed the line, and on these things he stood firm on. He would let them call him Belshazzar. He would learn the language, but he just said, the food thing, I'm not going to do the food thing. So in Israel in those days, and if you've read any of the Old Testament, there's a lot of food rules, right? And so that's number one. There's a lot of food rules. A lot of things were not kosher for the Jews to eat. But on top of that, all this food had been offered to the idols and to the false gods of Babylon. And Daniel just said, I'm not consuming that stuff. I'm not going to put that stuff, that impure stuff, into my body. And so he makes a stand. And what I find interesting about Daniel's stand, and this was a small thing, it was just food, but he said no to something that everybody else celebrated. And that I find interesting, because everyone would celebrate, and man, the king's wine, the king's food. I mean, that is, if only I could have the king's wine and the king's food. I mean, Daniel and his 3 friends, they were the lucky ones. So everybody else was celebrating something that Daniel said no thanks to. And I think that has a lot of cultural applications to us today. Sometimes our culture celebrates all kinds of things that we need to say no to. Even though they're celebrating things, we just, no, I'm not going to celebrate that. That crosses the line for me. I'm not going to celebrate that. And Daniel said no to something that everybody else was celebrating. Daniel said no to something that would have been probably enjoyable. It's the king's food. It's the king's wine. I mean, who doesn't want that? It would have been enjoyable, but Daniel said no to that. You guys, sin is a lot of fun a lot of the times. If it wasn't fun, no one would do it, right? If it wasn't fun, there would be no one doing that sin. Sin is enjoyable, but here's the thing, God always has something better. If you were here last week, we talked about this. We don't serve the God of no, we serve the God of better. It may be enjoyable to do sin for a short amount of time, but if we choose something better, it leads us to a better position in life. If we choose God over sin, even though sin may be enjoyable for a short time, we choose something better. Taking that better choice gets to something better over time. So Daniel said no to something that was celebrated. He said no to something that was enjoyable. And he said no in a way that was honestly respectable. He made a deal with the official, right? He wasn't a jerk about it. He made a deal. Look what it says in verse 9. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, I'm afraid of my lord the king who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than all the other young men in your age? And the king would have my head because of you. Daniel said to the guard, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. I like that. Daniel stood on this small conviction of saying no to this food, but he's not a jerk about it, right? He does so in a respectful way that takes the official's goal and matches his goal to the same. So the goal was to have healthy and smart servants. That's the goal of the king. And Daniel says, I'm all for that goal, but I don't want to lose my convictions. So for me, it's not right to eat that food. So I'll agree with your goal, but I want to do it in a different way that matches my convictions. So I love that he did that respectfully. And sometimes, you guys, we can learn from that. In our culture, Christians can have some convictions and be real jerks about it sometimes. Do you agree with that? I mean, sometimes Christians can be jerks. I hope that's not bad to say. But we do get a bit of a reputation on that. And I believe, you guys, that we can have convictions but not be jerks about it, like Daniel. We can have convictions and still love people. We can have convictions and not treat people like they're our enemy, because people are created in God's image, right? So Daniel teaches us a bit about that, and so does Joseph, right? Joseph did the same thing. He was in a foreign land under foreign leadership, and he was in Egypt, but Joseph, he maintained his convictions at a cost, but he was so respectful about it that he still went up in his esteem. People esteemed Daniel. People esteemed Joseph because they stood on their convictions in a respectful way. I just really believe we can do that. In fact, I believe that when we stand on our convictions and we're respectful and loving to people, our convictions shine even brighter than when we're jerks about standing on our convictions. So I think it's a great precedent that Daniel set. And he said no to something that could have cost him too. This was life or death. Saying no to the king's ruling could have cost him his life. And for Daniel, he said, I don't care what it costs me. It's just food. It might cost me my life. I could just eat that food. It wouldn't be the end of the world, but it would be crossing my convictions in a small way. So even though it's going to cost me something, I'm putting my life on the line. I'm going to risk it. I'm going to say no. So what happened? At the end of their 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. And so the guard took away their choice food and wine, and they were to drink, and they were given vegetables and water instead. So the moral of the story is we all need to be vegetarians, right? No, that's not the moral of the story. But Daniel and his friends, right? I'll take vegetables and water to the king's food and wine, because that's what my conviction calls me to do. It looked like it was a sacrifice, but it's just food, but it did cost them. So, to these 4 young men, and this is the result of that, right? They stood firm on that small conviction, and what was the result? You don't know. Are they going to get in trouble? Are they going to get executed? Is the king going to be mad? To these 4 young men, verse 17, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. God blessed them because of their small choice. They took a stand on a small thing, and God blessed them. And not only did God bless them, but God blessed the people around them. At the end of the time, verse 18, set by the king to bring them into his service. Now, this is after 3 years. Remember? They had been given 3 years to be trained. At the end of that time, 3 years had passed, vegetables and water for 3 years. The chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. Here they are. Here's these people from Judah. Here's these Israelites who have only been eating vegetables and drinking water. And the king talked with them and found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. And it goes on. It gets better. In every matter of wisdom, verse 20, and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them how many times better? 10 times better. They were 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. So they stood up for what was right, and that caused them to stand out from the crowd. They stood up for what was right, and they stood out from the crowd because they were standing on their convictions and they were following God. They weren't just following the path that everyone else was on. 3 years of small obedience in the right direction, and suddenly they had 10 times the amount of influence that everybody else had. You guys, I believe that when we take those small steps, when we stand on those small convictions, when we make those small decisions every day in the right direction, man, I believe God blesses that. I believe God, and it doesn't mean everything's going to go perfect, and it certainly didn't all go perfect for them, but I believe that God will bless every area of our lives so much more when we're making those right decisions with the small things. Verse 21 ends chapter 1. Verse 21 is kind of like a fast forward. And sometimes the Bible does this. The last verse of a first chapter tells you the end of the story, and does that with this one. It says, and Daniel remained there in Babylon until the first year of King Cyrus. And now we might not know what that means, but Daniel was there in Babylon until he was about 80 or 90 years old. Daniel never really went back to Jerusalem. He was there the whole time. But Daniel remained into his old age, a wise man in the king's service until the next king was there. He saw Jerusalem fall, and he was there so long that Babylon started to send people back to Jerusalem to rebuild it again. And Daniel was there from the destruction of Jerusalem to the point where Jerusalem started to get people back, and they started to rebuild those walls and rebuild that temple. And we know all kinds of great stories that happened after that. Daniel spanned that amount of time. He was a great man in the Bible because he made small decisions in the right direction time after time after time. And then when their things really got crazy, he could stand firm on his faith. So how does that relate to us 2,630 years later? Daniel's world was shaken. His convictions were unshakable. That's Daniel. For us, we live in a shaken world. We can have unshakable convictions. You guys, like I said earlier, we do live in a pretty shaky world right now. Our world, our season of life here, especially in the last 10 years, whenever COVID happened, 2020, right? In the last 15 years, we've lived in a very shaky time. Before COVID, look back earlier, back to the golden era, which were the 1990s. All right? That was my golden era. I was in college at that time, grunge music out of Seattle. You know, it was the 90s. You guys, the 90s to the 2015s, that 25-year period was one of the most peaceful and prosperous times that our entire history of our planet has ever seen. That peaceful and prosperous time between the 90s and 2015s, that was an unusually calm period of time. There were no huge world wars, right? Peace and prosperity was gaining. More people were taken out of poverty and disease in that 25 years than the entire history of the planet. It was a calm time. And for me and my wife, that meant we lived in that little golden window of time that gave us the right opportunity to buy a house at 22 years old. We had already been married for a year or two. 22 years old, we bought our first house for $62,000, right? And we were able to raise our family on one pastor's income in that time. I mean, it would be impossible to do that, almost impossible, yet but a miracle to do that in our day and time in 2025. You know, our young people here have a big challenge ahead of them. You know, we've seen incredible inflation. We've seen pandemics, right? We've seen political division. Wars have started up again. All this stuff in the last 15 years has been pretty shaky. You know, we lived in a time that was a little easier. And for those of you who are older, you might say, oh, no, that time was, you know, back then, back in the baby boomer time. That was a time of prosperity. There are a lot of times of prosperity, but now is a very shaky time that we're living in. But you guys, with all this stuff happening in the world right now, here's the good news. We can have an unshakable faith. But that doesn't have to stress us out. We don't have to be panicked about the world and about political division and about disease and about war. We don't have to be panicked about it. We should pray about it. We should be concerned about it. We should care about it. But it doesn't have to ruin us and cause us to go into anxiety and depression and stress, because we can stand on an unshakable faith. Someone shout amen at that. That's important, right? When I was in the black church, I would say something like, God is good, and then people would respond to all the time. And I would say, and all the time, that's right. We have that same kind of faith today. And even though the world can get worse, and you guys, I'm an optimist, but I don't see the world all of a sudden just coming back together, you know, to a time of peace and prosperity. I don't know. I'm an optimist, but I think the world might be shaky for a while. All right? That's okay, because I've got Jesus in my life. It's okay because I stand on a faith that's solid. That's the firm foundation. And the world can do all kinds of things the world does, but I'm going to be a light in the world. And I'm not going to be pessimistic about it. I'm going to be an optimist, because God's called me to be a light in that world. And you know what? When the world gets darker, what shines brighter? My light. I don't even have to try to make my light shine brighter. If the world's getting darker, my light just automatically looks brighter, right? And we can have that kind of faith in our society today. An unshakable faith can handle a shaky world, because Hebrews 13, verse 8. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and when? Today and forever, right? Jesus remains the same. We can stand on that. Daniel didn't follow the crowd, he followed God. We always take it back to Jesus. What does Jesus say? Matthew 7:14, he says, but small is the gate and narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. He goes on to say, broad is the road, that path that leads to destruction. And if the whole culture is shaky and going in one direction, that's okay for me, because I'm following Jesus and my path is going to be solid. Because it's the narrow path, the crowd's going that way. I'm going to be counterculture. I'm going to focus in on Jesus and make those small decisions in His direction every day, and I'm going to be okay. In fact, not only am I going to be okay, but I'm going to be even more effective when the world is shaky, because I'm standing on solid ground, and I'm going to point people to Jesus. There's opportunity in a shaky world if you have an unshakable faith. That's what I want our congregation to have. I want us to have a strong faith when the world continues to get shaky, because we can point people to Jesus who strengthens us. Daniel made the small decisions in the right direction every day. I'm going to throw another James Clear quote from Atomic Habits. If you want to predict your future, look at your daily habits. They are the small steps that determine where you will end up. If you want to predict how strong your faith is going to be, look at what you're doing today to strengthen your faith. So I want to challenge you with just two questions as we get ready to close. Two questions are this: what are the small things you need to say no to? Sometimes we need to say no to the small things. So what are the small things you need to say no to? Maybe it's bad habits. Maybe it's something you're doing every day. It's just a bad habit. It's something you're in. Maybe it's an addiction. Maybe it's just a small addiction. You need to say no to that addiction. Maybe it's your screen time, how much time you're spending in front of your little screen or your big screen on your wall. Maybe it's your screen time. That's a small thing that you need to say no to. Imagine if we were to replace half of our screen time with time with God, or with time that enriches us, or with something better than screen time. Even to take half of that. What are the small things you need to say no to? Maybe it's an unhealthy habit at work. Maybe at home you're one person and at work you're someone different, right? Maybe you need to be consistent in all of whether you're at work or home in front of your family or wife. Maybe that's the small thing you need to say no to. Need to say no to changing your character from place to place. Maybe you need to say no to some ungodly influences. Maybe there's someone speaking into your life who you need to turn down the volume of someone who's speaking negatively into your life. Maybe you need to turn down your outrage news channels. Please, people, turn them down, right? Maybe you need to turn down that outrage, turn down those bad social media habits. I'm all for social media if it's encouraging people, you guys, but social media that just brings you down and makes you feel depressed, you can say no to that. What are the small things on a daily basis you need to say no to? Think about something today. Nail something down. Say no to one thing. What is it in your life? And then what are the small things in your life you need to say yes to? Just a small thing. If you do a small thing every day, it makes a huge difference over time. Maybe it's stealing back some of your time from those screens, from those outrage channels, from that social media. Steal back some of your time and say yes to some good things that bring fruit into your life. Say yes to spending more time with your family, more time with great relationships. Say yes to maybe a little bit more reading positivity into your life. Listen to a podcast that brings into your life. Say yes to other good things. Your physical habits, your financial habits, your education. Say yes to those small things, and they're going to help you lead you in the right direction. What are the small things you say yes to? Most importantly, say yes to some kind of spiritual practice, some kind of spiritual routine, some kind of faith move in your daily life. You guys, we've started up a Bible study on Wednesday nights, and this is a promo for that, all right? And the Bible study, it's all about developing godly habits. It's all about spiritual disciplines. And it's about 9 more weeks. You do only miss the introduction. Come and join us on Wednesdays here at 6:30 right in the library. And we're going to talk about the habit of prayer, the habit of scripture reading, the habit of meditating on God's word. We're even talk about fasting. We're going to talk about solitude. We're going to talk about keeping the Sabbath. We're going to talk about all those spiritual disciplines that if we can put at least one of those into a daily practice, that's exactly what we learned from Daniel. A small thing that over time leads to an unshakable faith. What are the small things you need to say yes to? So, when you have a strong moral foundation, you guys, we can live so much more victorious lives. With strong moral foundations, we won't make dumb mistakes. We won't make those major moral failures. A little bit every day in the right direction with God, we're going to be able to stand firm. I'll leave you with one verse. Then we're going to pray and we're going to worship. Matthew 25, verse 21. It all comes back to Jesus. All these Old Testament stories come back to Jesus. Jesus told this story, and at the end of the story, his master replied, "Well done, good and faithful servant." And we always envision, I hope God says that to me one day. Well done, good and faithful servant. And what have you done well? You have been faithful with what? A few things. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. God wants to put us in charge of many things. God wants us to have an unshakable faith, but it starts with being faithful with a few things. You guys, let's pray, and I'm going to ask